We're back with T3, the Teen Timeline. You guys are doing great. Now, we've moved through a whole lot of history in a very short amount of time, as you know. So you're probably getting sick of people's names. You're probably getting sick of people sinning. You're like, I wish they'd just get it straight so we could get to the good stuff. You know what? Sorry. They, like us, are not going to get it straight for a little while longer. Now, we have moved through the early world. We've moved through the patriarchs. Look at your colors. Look at your timelines. The early world, the patriarchs, we've moved through Egypt and Exodus, right? We've moved through the desert wanderings. We've moved through conquest and judges, the royal kingdom, the divided kingdom. We've seen the role that prophets play. And now the bad stuff happens, okay? If we thought the divided kingdom was bad, it gets worse. So we're going to pick up the story, and that is after Solomon's son, Rehoboam, and Jeroboam have split the kingdoms. Northern kingdoms had several bad kings in a row, and we're going to go to the period of the exile. We can read about this in 2 Kings. That's the chronological narrative book. You can read about this in 2 Kings. And Israel falls to Assyria. Assyria is up north, and they come in and they sack Israel. Okay, the capital is Samaria. And you can read about that in 2 Kings chapter 17. Okay, 2 Kings chapter 17. In fact, when I was joking around today with that first prayer, that, you know, with all those names and all those places and things you don't understand, that comes from 2 Kings 17. And now hopefully you understand, because that's a lot of names of false gods and a lot of places that aren't really on our map, because they're coming from up north and they're coming down and they've sacked the town. Okay, so basically they are taken off into exile, and they basically their town is decimated. People are intermarried, people are killed, some people are taken off into slavery, some people stay there. That's a really bad scene. Now, while this is going on in the north, the southern kingdom in Judah is still going along. Okay, now the prophets start to really pick up pace. They're going, hey, look what happened to our brothers and sisters up north. Look what happened to Israel. Pay attention. Pay attention. This is why in some of the prophets you'll hear them say, you know, repent, O sons of Judah, who are in the south, you know, lest your future be like your brothers in Israel, who are in the north. So if you're ever at Mass, you're going, okay, I thought Judah and Israel, I thought those places were in the same place. And hopefully it starts to make a little bit more sense now. Hopefully next time you're at church, next time you're at Mass, it starts to make a little bit more sense about how this is all coming together. So we have Israel falling to Assyria. And then eventually, you know what, even though we've had good kings like Josiah who have been able to keep the kingdom together and been able to stay right with God for a while, eventually the southern kingdom, Judah, is going to fall, and it does fall. And you can actually read about that in 2 Kings 25. Judah falls, but not to Assyria. Judah falls to Babylon. The world powers during the course of this time have shifted. Egypt was in power, then the Assyrians were in power, and now the Babylonians are in power. And the Babylonians come down, and they're going to take them into exile. But they're not going to do it all at once. They're actually pretty smart about how they do it. They go into Jerusalem, they sack the town, and they now start deporting Jerusalem, the land of Judah. They start deporting the kingdom of Judah up into Babylon. So you see on your charts and your workbooks and stuff, you see this bloodline is now carried north. So now they've been in the land of Canaan. Now the bloodline goes north, okay, because all the people are going north. And in the first wave, they're going to take out the richest, the smartest, the up-and-comer types. They're going to take most of the men out of Judah. They're going to take them up north, people who can work for them, who can fight for them, okay? And in that first wave of people they take out, it goes in 3 waves. The first wave, they're going to take out a guy by the name of Daniel, okay, and Daniel and his friends. Now, if you've ever read the book of Daniel before, Daniel's listed as one of the prophets, and Daniel's actually one of the more entertaining books in Scripture. But Daniel's not just a prophetic book. Daniel's also what's called apocalyptic literature. Apocalyptic literature. It's much like Revelation. And I don't want to get into Revelation too much. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But, you know, Revelation is not necessarily like, okay, this is how it's going to go down. God's going to be coming with a flaming sword, and all 144,000 are going to be cool, and everybody else is going to get dead. You know, people get really nervous. What's going to happen in Revelation? And we start reading certain codes and reading into symbols and that kind of thing. Symbols are very important. In apocalyptic literature, basically it's a lot of truths that are being espoused through symbolism, okay? But it's not all necessarily, it can be allegorical, it can be future, it can be prophetic, but it's a different kind of writing. Okay, so basically the book of Daniel, while Daniel was taken up and deported during this time of the exile, the book of Daniel wasn't actually written for several hundred years after. That his whole story was being handed down generation to generation orally, okay? So it was orally being handed down to people. So while these events took place, this became a very popular story. And it was a very popular story, again, later on when people were being persecuted, people were suffering. So the book of Daniel, when you read it, is really meant to give people hope. They've been taken into slavery. Now this is, you have to start saying to yourself, like, when are these people going to get it? Like, when are they going to get it? Like, come on. Break out of the sight. You know, knock, knock, wake up. You have to start looking, and eventually, I start to look at these people and go, come on, how dumb can you be? How can you not see this coming? And then, you know what, the minute I say, how dumb can you be, I don't even get the word be out. I have to walk in and look in the mirror and go, how dumb can you be sometimes? Very, very, very dumb. And honestly, like, we're really no different. We can always put ourselves into this story. Now, when it comes to Daniel, you've probably heard different stories. You've heard about, maybe like the three guys, his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they get thrown into the furnace. Maybe you've heard that before. I call them Shadrach and Ben because those other names are very long. So Shadrach and Ben, they get thrown into the furnace, and God protects them. Daniel ends up working himself into a very important place in the courts, a very important place in Babylon. And it's interesting is that he decodes this vision, and it says there's basically going to be 5 kingdoms. And the last kingdom, which is the kingdom of Jesus, is going to cease all other kingdoms. It's going to be the final kingdom. And you, king, are here, and you're in the wrong kingdom. 5 is going to be the kingdom, okay? You might be kingdom number 1 right now, but not for long. And one of the things you can learn about Daniel is that Daniel, even though he's working for the king, the king likes him, he gets himself into trouble along the way because Daniel stays devoted to his prayer as well. And some of the guys who don't like Daniel force a law, and they say, okay, king, when the king's not really paying attention, they say, you should sign this law. And this law will say that anybody who does not worship you for the next 30 days will be put to death, will be put in the lion's den. The king says, okay, fine. So they enact this law to catch Daniel because they know that he's a devout Jew and they know he's going to be praying. And we read about it in Daniel chapter 6. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Then they came near and said before the king, O king, did you not sign an edict that any man who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days except you shall be cast into the den of lions? The king was forced to say yes. Now, even though the king liked Daniel a lot, he ended up having to throw him in the lion's den. And you read the story, it's a great story, and Daniel gets thrust into the lion's den. I want you to take a second and go, okay, did this really happen? What is really going on here? And you know what? Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. This is the oral tradition that got handed down. And what happens is Daniel gets thrown into the lion's den. And if you were actually to put yourself in this position, it's hard for us to really imagine. We see lions at the zoo, right? We see lions at the zoo. We see lions in cartoons. Madagascar. Lions are fun. You know what I mean? So we find ourselves and we're like, what's going on? But I want you to really picture it for a second. This is ancient times. If you've ever watched the movie Gladiator and the extra scenes, and they actually have these deleted scenes where there's lions and there's people in the Colosseum, and it's really a scary thing. And if you were thrust into a dark cave, and the only light behind you, it gets extinguished, and a boulder goes in front of that. And you hear paw prints, and you hear growling, and you smell death. You smell blood. You smell like the carcasses of other people that have been eaten before, and you hear breathing. And you move deeper into the cave, and then you hear a growl. And then you hear another growl. And then before you know it, you hear paw prints coming at you, maybe faster and faster. And so often we just go, oh, it's just a story. Put yourself in that story for a second. And what does Daniel do? Daniel prays. It's pretty much all you can do at that point. You better pray, okay? Otherwise, you're lunch, you know what I mean? So he starts praying, and God intervenes, and God saves Daniel. Now, this story spreads. And you can imagine for people who are enslaved, who feel like God has forgotten about them again. They feel like God's forgotten about them. Remember we said, God doesn't forget about us. When we said he remembered her, it didn't mean he forgot. It meant that he was going to become one with her again. Okay? But God does not forget about us. But sometimes we feel like he does. And you know what? There's been times when you've been thrust into a bad situation. And maybe you chose that situation, or maybe you ended up in it. But there's been times you've ended up in a bad situation. And your only hope in that situation is to pray. And we can learn a lot from Daniel. Basically what they were saying to Daniel was, you have to deny your God if you're going to function in this society, if you're going to function in this culture. And that's not the last time we're going to hear this story. You have to deny your God. You have to basically bow to this God. You have to act this way if you're going to be one of us. Otherwise, we're going to kill you. You might not think this still happens. It does still happen, doesn't it? I mean, don't you have to fit in a certain way? On your campuses, your workplaces, teams, you still kind of have to fit in. People are basically like, hey, you know what? I don't want to, maybe you have your friends. I don't want to hear about this God stuff. I don't want to hear about the church stuff. We'll be friends, but that's a taboo topic. We're not going to talk about it. We can function. We can be friends. We can all hang out. We can all work together, go to school together. We can hang out together. But I don't want to hear about the God stuff. Okay? Keep that to yourself. We hear that a lot. We hear it a lot. Maybe we've even said it at times before we really got, closer to God ourselves. And the reality is, like Daniel, you know what? Because when it's all over and it's just you and God and you're looking face to face, none of those other people are going to be there. And the person who on our right and on our left, who we oftentimes think about, oftentimes they influence what we say and don't say, do and don't do, wear and don't wear. Those friends whose opinions matter to us so much aren't going to be around. It's just you and God, face to face. You know, Daniel had that moment, and he chose God. And God did extraordinary things. So don't ever mistake these miracle stories and go, oh, it's a miracle story. It's just a story. It's just made up to give people confidence. That's not really me. It is you, and it is me. Because every single one of us, call the lion whatever you want to call the lion. Call the lion that, you know what, you're going to be fed to the lions. You know what? Your name's going to be smeared. Your reputation's going to be terrible. You're going to be unpopular. People aren't going to like you. Those are all lions. And the question is, do you or I, does our faith in God, our relationship with God mean more to us than the possible, social death that we're going to undergo if we live our faith? And when that happens, when push comes to shove, we got to pray. We can learn that from Daniel. Trust me, nothing's going to happen to you. And Shadrach and Ben learned it. And they were in the fire, and he learned it. And we keep hearing that. So they're in exile. And they're up there for a while. And finally, you know what? They're in the dark night of the soul. They're lamenting things. And you see, as people are carried off in different ways, like the second wave took off Ezekiel and Baruch. So when you start reading, if you look at these supplemental books, right, in the exile time, as you look up the supplemental books, you go, okay, this is what's going on. And when you look up, you go, okay, so that's why, Tobit and Lamentations and Zephaniah and Habakkuk and Ezekiel. Ezekiel's taken into slavery. So when you read Ezekiel, you have to put on the lens of the blues. He's singing the blues. It makes more sense. What does it mean to lament something? That means that you're crying out. It's like the blues. Like if you have a parent or a grandparent who listens to the blues, right? That Lamentations is just the blues. Jeremiah is just lamenting his whole situation. Right? Baruch. When you read Baruch, he's in this time period. Baruch is Jeremiah's scribe. So, it's not that, I expect you, anybody expects you, okay, you should know this. You're going home and reading Baruch. You're going home and reading Habakkuk. Nothing brings a teenager or young adult's life to life on a Friday night like Habakkuk. But just that when you hear about Habakkuk, when you come across it, if you ever are led to read it, you can go back to this work with this timeline and go, okay, this is what's going on. This is why he seems so down. It's not that Jeremiah was just a bummer to be around. Jeremiah was living in a bad time. Maybe he was a lot of fun. Maybe he's the guy you'd call to go bowling with, but he's just in a bad spot in his life. And it all makes sense now because you understand what's going on. Maybe you have people in your life who are really, really fun people, wonderful people, and they get really depressed. Or they go through a really bad time in their life, and they're different. They've changed. Maybe they lose a loved one, and they're just down. That doesn't mean that they are down. It means they're in a down time in their life. And that's what's going on in the exile. So in the first and second wave, you get Daniel, Ezekiel, Baruch. The third wave, you have just massive destruction. Okay, Jerusalem is gone. It's gone. And basically, they're going to spend 70 years in captivity. 70 years in captivity in Babylon. But part of Daniel's vision is this. It's not just going to last 70 years. It's going to last 70 times 7. It's going to last 490 years till this thing gets turned around. You fast forward 490 years, and we're going to be in the Maccabean revolt. We're going to be getting the Messianic fulfillment. And he's prophesying. He's saying it's going to last for a long time. That makes sense because when they actually wrote Daniel and read it, it was about 400 years later, 400 or 500 years later, right in that same time period. Okay, so you move out of the exile. Well, finally, Babylon is no longer the world power. Persia comes in as the world power. And there's a guy named Cyrus, King Cyrus in Persia, and he says, go back. I'm letting you go. God speaks to Cyrus and says, let him go. So he's sending him back. So we go from the blue, we go into the yellow. Okay? As we go to the yellow, we're moving out of the exile into the return. It's brighter days, right? Brighter days. So they've been singing the blues. They've been enslaved. Now we're going to brighter days. They return, and God brings them back. He returns them to their land. Okay? And they come back to Canaan. But here's the problem. Jerusalem's been destroyed. The temple's been destroyed. Their land looks nothing like it used to look. Okay? And they have no system of government and no leadership. So as you look to your timelines and you start to see some of these people, you see some names you probably never heard of before, like Zerubbabel. Okay? Zerubbabel. Again, if you're looking for names for kids someday, jot that one down. Zerubbabel. Okay? Or pack it away, and if your kid gives you a hard time, change their name. Only God can change their essence, but you can go to court and you can change their name. Okay? So as you get into the return, Zerubbabel is going to rebuild the temple, and you can read about that in Ezra, the book of Ezra in chapter 3. Okay, so basically he comes back and says, okay, first things first, got to have a temple. Now it's not going to be anywhere near as nice as the first temple, but they're going to start rebuilding it because they have to have a central place. A temple is a place that you worship and that you come together and meet. Okay, so we start to rebuild the temple. The second wave when they come back Ezra's going to come down several years later, okay? Several years later. When he comes back, he's going to start teaching. And he's going to start trying to reinstill the law and reinstill a little bit of order. And you can read about these different things. When Ezra comes back, it's in Ezra 7, okay? And again, you looking at the supplemental books, what's going on at this time? Read, Ezra's the chronological book. That tells you the story, all right? Nehemiah tells you the story, but other books like Malachi are being written in this time. So you have to read them in that light. So Ezra comes back, reinstills the law, right? Tries to give him some kind of system. Nehemiah is going to come back in about 444, and Nehemiah says, you know what we got to do? We got to build walls. Because Jerusalem is already a city that's set up on a hill. But he says, we got to build some walls. Remember the walls of Jericho? Like they were impenetrable, right? Until God came and they fell. But walls are hard to get over, especially when you're on a mountain. So he comes back and says, we're going to build walls so this doesn't happen to us again. Okay? He lets you know it's going to happen again, of course. So they build the walls. They're in the return. And really, you know what? This is kind of like if you've ever been in a car accident, and you've walked out of the car accident, praise God, like you walked out, but you're kind of in that daze, you're kind of in that shock time. You're just like, this is pretty much what's going on. Israel has been through a massive car wreck. There is just trauma. And they're basically back, and they're walking around for a while going like, what happened? What has happened with Abraham and Moses and Red Sea? And they're walking around. David and Bath and bad times. We get divided, and then before you know it, was deep with lions. Before you know, they're just there walking around like in a daze, and they're going, okay, we're back. What do we got? And really they're ripe, for the taking. And at this point, you know what? Persia's been in power. Well, you know what? Persia is going to give way to Greece. And in this time in the return, it's like they're there. They're just trying to get their bearings. They're trying to get the house back set up, set it back up. They're trying to get things back in order. And in this time, there's actually a wonderful story, an amazing story. If you've never read it, I'm telling you, write this down. This is the Bible's first beauty pageant, and it's found in the book of Esther. Okay, now Esther takes place in the time of the return, and you can see in the supplemental books where it is. Now, her name was Hadassah, which means extraordinary beauty. And in Persian, that's translated to mean Esther. And here's how it went. There is a Persian king named Ahasuerus. Another good name. Put an asterisk next to that one. Ahasuerus. And Ahasuerus has a queen. Her name is Vashti. But Vashti embarrasses Ahasuerus. Okay? And now he's looking for a new queen. So he sends out his messengers to all the outer provinces and says, find me the most beautiful women around. And his messengers go out, and they take all these women back, and they're going to bring them back for a year, and these women are going to learn how to dress and how to walk and how to talk. He's putting them through like finishing school. It's like, that whenever you watch like a beauty pageant, this is the week that leads up to the pageant, and all these beauty queens learning how to walk and how to eat and how to talk and how to, break wind, and, this is how you do it with class, And so he brings all these women back, right, for a year, and it's going to be a big beauty pageant, and basically Ahasuerus, his eyes fall upon Esther, and he is just smitten. Not like when God smites people, like, okay? No, he's smitten. He's just, oh, you are beautiful. I cannot speak. I cannot finish sentences. And now Esther is brought in, right, as the queen. Now here's what happens. He has this tyrannical, just maniacal kind of general named Haman. And Haman hates Jews, hates the Israelites. And he really likes the attention. He likes being powerful. He actually makes it